قانون التعبئة الوطنية، هذا الذي يرفع كرها أيضا، لأن الحرب أصبحت تشاركية والصمود والدفاع أصبح مهمة الجميع. على المستوى السبراني موجودة الاستراتيجية حماية الأنظمة المعلوماتية ل 2025-2029 التي استحدثت مؤخرا، وهذه الملتقيات والكلمات التوجيهية لبناء سيناريوهات ولتعزيز اليقظة الاستراتيجية للدولة الجزائرية، ولكن أيضا لبناء وعي للمجتمع. وعندما نتحدث
وهذا أكبر من الرهانات الكبرى دكتور،
طبعا لأنه عندما نتحدث عن المجتمع أستاذ بالقاسم، المجتمع هو من يدير مؤسسات الدولة. عندما يكون الفرد أو الإطار في أي مؤسسة واعيا ومدركا لهذه التحولات ومتشبعا بمتغيرات التي تطبع حالة أو فترة عدم اليقين العميقة التي تواجه النظام الدولي، فإنه ستكون له قدرة على التكيف ومرونة على التصدي ومواجهة أي تهديد، كل في منطقته وكل أيضا في مؤسسته.
شكرا جزيلا لك الباحث في الشؤون الاستراتيجية الدكتور رشيد علوش. شكرا جزيلا لك. شكرا ألف شكر مستمعينا الفاضلين، نلتقي غدا في أمان الله.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Minister Delegate to the Minister of National Defence, Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Said Changreha, has reaffirmed the National People's Army commitment to enhancing operational readiness in line with the instructions of the President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defence. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is scheduled to return to Pakistan today to present Iran's framework for ending the current war. According to Iranian media reports, as President Masoud Pezeshkian declared the country will not participate in negotiations under a military blockade. And US President Donald Trump was rushed to safety by security agents after a gunman opened fire inside the hotel hosting the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Those were the major developments. Now the news in details. Good afternoon. The National People's Army has reaffirmed its commitment to enhancing operational readiness in line with the instructions of the President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defence, Army General Minister of National Defence Abdelmajid Tebboune. The Minister Delegate to the Minister of National Defence, Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Said Changreha, stressed that the Army's combat preparedness is built on the principle of full integration and seamless coordination between operational and logistical components. This approach aims to ensure that the military structure functions as a unified system where the effectiveness of the whole depends on the proper functioning of all its parts without exception. General Changreha further underlined that the success of the battlefield is now more than ever dependent on the efficiency of support and supply chain systems. These systems must guarantee the timely and effective delivery of the resources and capabilities to operational units in order to sustain performance and secure mission success.
The organization of this specialized forum aims to diagnose the current reality of operational logistics support chains, identify the most prominent difficulties and challenges that face the nation, and then formulate realistic solutions for them, in addition to anticipate future prospects that will develop them and enhance their effectiveness in line with the requirements of operational environments and modern battlefields. In this regard, in particular, we endeavor in the People's National Army in implementation of the instructions of the President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, Minister of National Defense, to establish the foundations of readiness that we aim to achieve and reflect on the ground at the level of the battlefield.
That was the Minister Delegate to the Minister of National Defence, Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Said Changreha. The exceptional revision of electoral lists ahead of the July 2nd legislative elections is winding up today. The details with Mohamed Khatel.
Launched on April 12th following a presidential decree by President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, the operation aims to prepare for the election of members of the National People's Assembly, APN. According to the National Independent Election Authority, ANI, the process has run smoothly, with increased use of digital tools to modernize procedures, improve transparency, and simplify services such as registration, data updates, and address changes. A centralized data system has also been set up to monitor all stages of the electoral process in real time, both across Algeria's 1,541 municipalities and in diplomatic missions abroad. The revision targets unregistered citizens, those turning 18 by election day, and voters who have changed residence. Meanwhile, political parties and independent candidates have begun collecting signature forms with candidacy files due 45 days before the vote. ANI is responsible for overseeing and managing the entire electoral process, while logistical support is provided by the administration.
The Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Jesus Nasri, has extended his congratulations to the national judo teams on their African Championship titles. In a post published on X platform, Mr. Nasri congratulated the national judo teams, both women and men, on their well-deserved continental title, which reflects the determination of the athletes and their insistence on raising the national flag high. He stressed that this achievement adds to Algeria's winning track record, moving forward with confidence and steady progress toward further excellence. The Speaker of the People's National Assembly, Brahim Bourali, for his part, also congratulated the national judo champions and the outstanding gymnasts at continental level. Through his official account, Mr. Bourali congratulated the victorious Algerian men and women on winning the African Judo Championships in Nairobi and reclaiming the continental crown with 4 gold, 1 silver and 4 bronze medals. He also congratulated champion Kylian Emour for her gold on the uneven bars and Dana Louari for her gold in the vault in Yaoundé. These achievements, he said, confirmed the status and leadership of Algerian sport at the continental level. Moving to the situation in the Middle East, at least 3 Palestinians were killed in airstrikes carried out today by the Israeli forces against the southeastern sector of Gaza City. Mohamed Khatel has more details in this report.
The news agency Wafa stressed that the drone attacks targeted a crowd of civilians in the district of Al Zaytun and an area near Khan Yunis in the southern part of the enclave. Earlier, 3 Palestinians were killed and several others wounded in a similar attack that targeted the northern part of Gaza. This came as UNRWA warned against the propagation of skin diseases in Gaza, urging for support to be provided to its teams and to the environmental health teams to improve the living conditions of the Palestinian population. It stressed that the skin diseases were spreading fast in the overcrowded shelters and displacement sites set up across the Gaza Strip. UNRWA today announced a reduction in school week to 4 days for the 2025-2026 academic year. The decision is part of a set of austerity measures aimed at ensuring the continuity of the basic services destined to the Palestinian refugees. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, the Israeli occupying forces intensified their acts of aggression on several regions amid attacks launched by Jewish settlers against several villages and towns including Hebron, Qalqiliyah and Nablus. In this connection, the Israeli forces imposed restrictions on traffic and on the Palestinians' movement in various districts and localities across the Palestinian territory.
In Lebanon, 7 people have been killed and 24 others wounded, including 3 children, in air raids launched over the past 24 hours by the Israeli occupying army against the country's southern part. The news agency ANI said several localities were hit by the raids. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom and Finland have condemned the Israeli army's attacks targeting journalists and media professionals in Lebanon. The 2 countries and co-chairs of the Media Freedom Coalition stressed that the journalists were playing a vital role by shedding light on the reality of the war and therefore must be protected. They rejected as unacceptable any violence aiming the journalists and urged all the parties to see to it that all media professionals in Lebanon can work freely and safely. According to the Lebanese Press Union, at least 27 journalists and media professionals have been killed since the Israeli occupying army launched its attacks on Lebanon early last month. The Syrian news agency SANA has reported that the Israeli occupying army carried out a new incursion into the town of Jabata el-Kashab in the southern or in the outskirts of Quneitra in southwestern Syria. Sana specified that an occupying force made of several Israeli military vehicles advanced along the road and set up a checkpoint. Israeli occupying forces had conducted a similar incursion in the same area as part of their ongoing violations in southern Syria. The Israeli occupying army continues its aggressions and violations of the 1974 disengagement agreement, multiplying incursions into southern Syria, raids, arrests, and land leveling. Syria consistently calls for the withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces from its territory. In Sudan, 7 people were killed and 22 others wounded in the city of El Obeid, north of Kordofan, following a bombardment carried out by the Rapid Support Paramilitary Forces, RSF. The Sudan Doctors Network announced that the attack did not target military objectives but aimed to cause the highest possible number of civilian casualties in serious violation or serious violation of all humanitarian and international laws and norms. It urged the international community and humanitarian organizations to pressure the RSF to stop these repeated attacks and protect civilians. It also called on the relevant authorities to support medical facilities in El Obeid with supplies and staff in order to cope with the growing number of wounded and prevent a worsening of the health situation. Sudan has been engulfed in conflict between the army and the RSF since April 2023, a war that has killed tens of thousands, displaced millions, and created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Investigations into the 2 drug smuggling tunnels discovered respectively in 2025 and 2026 in an area under constant surveillance by Moroccan authorities are facing silence from the Marzam laymen, the Spanish daily, The Objective, stating that the kingdom has ignored all letters regulatory sent by Spanish authorities to determine where those tunnels lead. Spanish judicial sources said investigations into 2 drug tunnels linking Morocco and Spain are being hindered by Morocco's lack of cooperation, with no response to Spanish requests for information. Authorities suspect the tunnel's proximity to a Moroccan military-controlled area may explain the silence. Both tunnels discovered in 2025 and 2026 were highly sophisticated and used for large-scale hashish trafficking. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is scheduled to return to Pakistan today to present Tehran's framework for ending the current war, according to Iranian media reports, as President Masoud Pezeshkian declared the country will not participate in negotiations under a military blockade. More details with Mohammed Khatel.
IRIB news agency reported that in his 5th telephone conversation with Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, Pezeshkian emphasized that diplomatic progress remains structurally difficult as long as the United States' hostile actions continue. The Iranian president stated that Washington must set aside operational obstacles, specifically the ongoing naval blockade of Iranian ports, to facilitate the groundwork for resolving the conflict. Araghchi's anticipated return to Pakistan follows an initial round of key meetings in Islamabad. According to Iranian media, the foreign minister was originally scheduled to depart for Russia after a stopover in Oman. However, the diplomatic itinerary was changed to allow Araghchi to return to Pakistan to convey Iran's perspective on ending the war to Pakistani officials who are acting as mediators. During his initial visit to Islamabad on Friday and Saturday, Araghchi met with Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, and Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi. It's worth recalling that U.S. President Donald Trump announced that his envoys would not be traveling to Pakistan for talks with Iranian officials after Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi left the country. The U.S. President told news outlet Fox News that he had ordered Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to ditch plans to visit the Pakistani capital Islamabad for the possible talks, despite his earlier claims that Iran was making an offer aimed at resolving the 2-month conflict.
And as mentioned earlier in our headlines, U.S. President Donald Trump was rushed to safety by security agents after a gunman opened fire inside the hotel hosting the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Among the attendants were Vice President J.D. Vance, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, as well as a number of high-profile politicians, diplomats, and journalists. According to U.S. media reports, the suspect has been identified as Cole Thomas Allen, 31, from Torrance, California, police said he was a guest at the Washington Hilton Hotel, where the event was being held, and was carrying multiple weapons, including firearms and knives. The alleged shooter who opened fire at the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night was a California-based teacher who went to the top-ranking university. And finally, with Colombia, 14 people have been killed and 38 others injured in a bomb attack that struck the municipality of Cajibio, Colombia's Cauca department, according to an updated toll from local authorities. An earlier report had put the death toll at 7, with 20 people wounded. Local media reported that a bomb hit a bus in the El Tunel area along the Pan-American highway connecting Cali and Popayan. Images shared online show significant damage to the bus roof and windows, as well as the roadway. The governor of Cauca, Octavio Guzman, condemned what he described on social media as a blind attack against the civilian population. With this last piece of news, we come to the end of our news bulletin. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned to Radio Algeria International.
The international event of the week.
The Palestinian issue once again came under focus, with the European Union foreign ministers failing to reach a consensus on whether to suspend the EU's association agreement with the Israeli occupying authorities, blamed for continued violations of the international law and human rights abuses. The EU foreign ministers meeting in Luxembourg failed to adopt the proposal put forth by Spain, Slovenia and Ireland to suspend the agreement that governs trade and political relations between the two sides. In this connection, the three European countries, known as staunch advocates of the Palestinian issue, urged the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, to reopen a part suspension of the association agreement, which was proposed last autumn but never secured majority support. The EU diplomacy chief told reports after the Luxembourg meeting that discussions will continue, while affirming that a part suspension of the agreement remained on the table but required states to shift their positions to come into force. The association agreement needs the unanimous approval of the EU's 27 member states to be revoked, but a partial suspension requires only a majority of 15 member countries. Asked on whether a suspension of the agreement, also backed by 60 human rights and humanitarian organizations and trade unions, can still be possible, despite some countries' disapproval, including Germany, Italy and the Czech Republic, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi has this to say.
The meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg once again exposed the deep divisions within the European Union over how to respond to the Israeli entity's continuation of violation of international law. Despite growing pressure, no consensus was reached on whether to suspend the EU-Israel Association Agreement. The initiative led by Spain, Ireland and Slovenia is worth noting, but the EU has to do more. It has to find a way of formula that will give Palestinians the right to self-independence in line with international law. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas confirmed that while no agreement had been reached, the possibility of a partial suspension remains under consideration. She did emphasize that such a step would require EU member states to shift their position, signaling that the debate is far from over. A full suspension of the agreement would require unanimous approval from all 27 member states, an outcome that appears highly unlikely at this juncture, given the firm opposition of countries such as Germany, Italy and Czech Republic. However, a partial suspension could in theory be adopted through a qualified majority, lowering the threshold to a minimum of 15 member states. But will that theory translate into action? The challenge from this perspective is less about procedure, finding the 15 member states to support that partial initiative, but it is political. While a coalition of countries continues to push for stronger measures, Others remain reluctant, due in part to their strategic alliances with the Israeli entity and other broader geopolitical consideration. This diversion has so far prevented the emergence of the necessary majority, and it seems to continue. A partial suspension in this matter is difficult to achieve. It depends entirely on whether enough member states are willing to reconsider their position. Until then, the European Union remains caught in a familiar pattern, acknowledging the gravity of the situation, yet struggling to translate that recognition into decisive collective actions.
Meanwhile, in the West Bank, reports from media and various human rights organizations and monitoring groups warn of against an increase in Jewish settlers' violence against the Palestinian population. The attacks launched by the Jewish settlers range from property damage to physical assault and killings. The Palestinians describe a growing insecurity, with some villages facing repeated and even daily attacks over the past weeks. New housing units have been set up in the West Bank, marking a significant settlement expansion in the Palestinian territory. Under the settlement building policy promoted by the Israeli far-right government, outposts are being legalized in blatant violation of international law and relevant UN resolutions. It is worth noting that in December 2025, the Israeli government approved the setting up of nearly 800 housing units in 3 settlements in the occupied West Bank. The rise in the Jewish settlers' violence and the significant increase in the settlement expansion have continued despite the international community's repeated calls for an end to the Israeli occupation that undermines the two-state solution considered the only viable path to peace and security. Asked on how the international community can save the two-state solution in the absence of meaningful peace negotiations, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
Reports from major media outlets and human rights organizations have indeed pointed to the Israeli entity expansionist policies in the West Bank, marked by violation of international law and acceleration of settlement expansion. Development seen widely as eroding the territorial basis of a future Palestinian states. Organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, alongside United Nations monitoring bodies like United Nations Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, have repeatedly warned that this trend are worsening conditions on the ground and undermining the feasibility of the two-state solution. In the absence of meaningful steps taken against the Israeli entity, the international community's role became less about facilitating dialogue and more about preserving the conditions that would make a future negotiation or solutions viable. Without that, this two-state solution is purely a rhetorical reference. There is the question of accountability and enforcement of international law. It is important that Israel must be held accountable of its action. Statements alone have had little effect. More concrete measures, whether diplomatic pressure, legal actions, or targeted restrictions, must be taken. This is where debates within bodies like the United Nations Security Council and institutions such as the European Union become critical, even if consensus is difficult. Then there is the international community. This international community has to support Palestinians, providing economic assistance and protecting their territorial integrity in the West Bank and Gaza. The failure to do so only lead to accepting Israeli establishment of illegal settlements and the normalization of a situation that clearly contradicts international law and the parameters of a two-state outcome. The wide support that the Palestinians have received in diplomatic recognition of a Palestinian state is another matter. This is a way to give justice to Palestinians and must not be just a symbolic gesture. It has to translate into real support, especially when the Israeli entity continues to deny the Palestinians the right to live in dignity. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the international community faces a credible test, and for that matter, its institutions, its laws, and everything that the UN stands for. Repeated affirmation that the two-state solutions is the only viable path ring hollow if not matched by policies that actively defend it. Without shift from declaratory diplomacy to practical measure, the window for that solution may continue to narrow if it hasn't already been closed.
It is clear that the Palestinian issue remains far from being resolved, but the current stalemate reflects not only divisions, but also the broader challenge of translating the international law's principles into action.
Welcome to your weekly program, Destination Algeria. I'm Jamal Samani. There are a number of great destinations in Algeria just waiting to be discovered. A curious mixture of cultures and influences. Algeria has something interesting to see in just about every city. The country is also the first largest on the African continent, so you can be sure that there are plenty of towns and cities to visit. Let's visit Algeria's fascinating destinations, you and I, together. Algiers has a number of fascinating landmarks and attractions within walking distance of one another, offering visitors the opportunity to enjoy parts of the city at a leisurely pace. One of the suggested routes to walk starts at the historic Palais de Rais bastion with its view of the inner port of Algiers and the lighthouse built by the infamous Barbarossa. From there, visitors can walk a route that includes Dar al-Hamra, the Convert Marketplace, the Museum of Popular Arts and Traditions, the 16th century Hammam Sidna, and a number of classic Algerian houses, some of which once housed the French governor of Algeria and other officials prior to Algerian independence. Considered to be one of the most important historical monuments of the city of Algiers, Palais de Rais is an extension of the city's Kasbah and was a commercial hub in the past. The initial buildings, which later developed into the palace, were constructed in